is Guy Standen. So, hi, Guy. Welcome to the podcast. How are you going?
G'day, Andrew. Luke. G'day, everybody.
So we should just preface this. We're under quite interesting circumstances at the moment. So Guy obviously is a massive car fan, Italian car guy, motorsport, tarmac rally. We're going to get into that as well. But he's also a Qantas captain, international captain, and obviously he resides in Adelaide, Australia. But he's calling in today from Heathrow Airport, where he is in quarantine, having flown from Australia to London, one of the very few flights that's actually happening at the moment. So yeah, quite an interesting time in history. So if Guy's internet is a little bit patchy, obviously we're doing our best, but we wanted to bring this through now because it's just a really interesting time in history. So yeah, Guy, why don't you tell us where you are at the moment and what your situation is?
Well, I'm in a Sheraton Airport hotel very close to Heathrow, and I got into Heathrow just over 24 hours ago, and I leave in about 24 hours' time. So it's a standard length trip that we do on the 787 with a standard service between Perth and London, but it's being run very differently at the moment, with the government actually supporting what we're doing to set up a minimum international setup so that we can still keep some avenues open to this part of the world.
Fantastic. So yeah, your flight across, what was that like? I mean, I mentioned we were chatting offline earlier about it wasn't exactly a full flight. How was it?
No, it wasn't a very full flight at all. In fact, we had more crew on it than we had passengers, but we did have 13.5 tons of cargo sitting in the hold, so that's important as well. And we followed the same sort of route that we'd normally be flying. It's just there's so few aircraft around at the moment, and the crew complement was a bit different. We usually fly with one captain, one first officer and 2 second officers. We on this occasion had 2 captains, 2 first officers and a second officer. Yep. So that made for 5 of us, which meant we could we all spent a little bit more time in the bunk than we normally would. So it was quite good as far as the rest was concerned. It's a pretty long flight, 17 hours, 46 minutes it took us to get from releasing the brakes in Perth to parking them in Heathrow.
Yeah, fantastic. And yeah, and obviously anyone that's ever flown into Heathrow before knows that it's one of the busiest airports in the world, and once you get to London and you finally we're here 17 hours, but then you get put into a holding pattern for half an hour, 45 minutes sometimes while you're waiting for a slot to get on the ground. I'm guessing it was a little quicker than that this time when you landed.
We were the only aircraft on frequency on the way in, so we got swapped across to London Control pretty much after we'd crossed over onto the channel, and then onto Heathrow Director, and no one else there, and they just gave us the minimum requirements that they needed to have for us to be able to fly the approach. Landed on runway 09 right. I hope we didn't wake the Queen up on our approach. And the weird thing was, clear to land and roll through to exit a taxiway down near the end of the runway, and just a brief little taxi in. We were the only aircraft moving on the airfield. There's aircraft all over the place. They're just all parked and doing nothing. And it's the same thing. I've been to Hong Kong during this time of things shutting down as well. And it was actually even more eerie there. There were rows and rows of aircraft, not only parked, but all taped up and put to bed for a long time. So it's all quite eerie and different.
Well, interesting. I don't know how many other people do this, but I really enjoy looking at flight radar and, seeing what's going on there. And it's like dead quiet at the moment. There's nobody flying. There's no planes. Like I just had a quick check then while Guy was talking, and I'll bring it up because it's really quite interesting to see. Like, that's London currently, which usually is like completely yellow with planes. And
so what are we looking? We've got what, 5? There's probably what 10 or 15 planes in the entire sort of southeast of England at the moment, which is just completely unprecedented.
Not many at all.
So,
You
Guy,
can even see a helicopter there, which you I never usually see because there's so many planes everywhere.
so
That's
Guy,
probably James May there, actually, I reckon.
outside of a sort of a wartime, have we ever seen anything like this before? Like, have you ever seen a flight radar that looks like that for the UK at all? Or
not to this level. This is unprecedented, as the word keeps being used, and it really is. I've never seen it get to this sort of stage. I've seen downturns of times when things were really quiet. I'm old enough to have been flying airplanes around whilst the pilots dispute was on in 1989 in Australia, and things were really very quiet then. But they were. I mean, things were quieter generally then. The airspace is so much busier than it was during those times, so it's much more marked now to see it drop back to what it is. There are places in the world where it is not as quiet, and I did notice on the way up the other night as we were flying over the Caspian Sea, there's an air route that goes north-south through there, and there are stacks of air traffic on that route. So there are people flying. There's talk also of several airlines about to crank right back up. Emirates, Qatar, those sorts of airlines doing things. There's a lot of work going on with freight, and so much work out there with freight that we're actually picking up some freight contracts. We're using our A330-300 aircraft in Qantas to be able to carry freight in an airplane that's not built for it. Because the only way to carry freight really in those airplanes is in the place where your bags normally go. So we can put a fair bit of stuff in there, but not as much as you can in a purpose-built freighter where it's above the floor as well. Basically, if you think of a tube and put a floor right through the middle of it, there's all the space for cargo underneath. On a freighter airplane, there's all the space for cargo above as well, plus a big door on the side that can fit big things in and that sort of stuff.
There's a loophole there. We need to specialize sensitive vehicle freight, like airplane freight, in human-shaped packaging, so you could just put it on the seat, belt it up, and off you go. And it could be like sensitive.
Need an exhaust system or something like that.
Look, you might laugh, but we're actually one ahead of you on that. We've actually been doing trials for how we can actually manage to fit freight into seats and make it safe and still carry stuff. So we're looking at everything we can possibly do at the moment. I mean, aviation, if you want to make a little bit of money out of aviation, start with a lot. It's
especially at the moment.
It's very, very capital intensive. And so the amount of money it takes to keep an airline running is absolutely astounding. And if you stop the airline from running, you still have to pay all the money that you're paying to a lot of things. And it's costing Qantas at the moment $40 million a week just to keep running. So we're actually pretty well set up. We can go for a long time at that rate, but it just shows you how much money you can very easily pour out of an organisation if it's not doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, go on, Luke. You were
I was just going to say it's actually something that came out in the news today that I forgot who it was talking about not resuming international travel till 2023 or some doomsday thing like that. And
that's interesting. Actually, I might just jump in on that one because I've actually just put a post on Facebook to correct something that ABC News posted on there.
Oh, good. I hope you've got good news for us.
They've said bad news if you're planning an overseas holiday. It won't get back to normal till 2023. They're misreporting what the IATA boss has come out and said, which is saying that aviation won't be back to the pre-COVID-19 levels until 2023. We're going to be flying domestically in Australia pretty soon, and we may well be flying internationally out of Australia to certain little spots here and there by the end of the year. And now's a great time to think about an international holiday because as it comes back online, there's going to be cheap flights. You won't get the over-tourism problems in places like Paris and Venice where everybody else in the world has decided to visit on the same day. And there's going to be some great deals going. So if anyone's thinking about an international holiday, start planning now. Good idea.
Yeah, I mean,
Please.
we've certainly been looking, you know, on a personal level, just for where, you know, obviously our plans. And to be fair, I think the realization setting in that we're not leaving the UK this summer. I think we're here for the bit, but certainly, you know, before they announced things like travel bans, a lot of accommodation we definitely noticed on platforms like Airbnb. You get, you know, the real premium accommodation, which normally in peak season there's a 1 or 2 week minimum plus all of this. You can book it for 2 or 3 nights at a heavily discounted rate, and we were very much looking forward to snapping up some great deals, but yeah, I'm not sure that we're leaving anytime soon, so perhaps not. But it's yeah, that's good to hear about the freight type thing. So I mean, when was the last time you flew? So I guess, can you give us a quick rundown of, obviously we'll get to motorsport and cars soon, but what a typical sort of month would look like for you 3 months ago versus what it looks like now, and then what adjustments you've had to make to jump on a plane. I assume it's not a car, you can't just jump in and, you know, and fly it if you haven't sort of been in the hot seat for a little while. Yeah, how was it?
Yeah, over the last couple of months, it's really only been in the last 3 months that I've finished my training on the 787 and moved to it. For the 5 years prior to that, I was 737s based in Adelaide, and lovely to not commute after having commuted for a lot of years to Sydney flying the A330. But it's adjusting to a different type of flying, doing the long distance flights. For us on the 737, I didn't have to think anywhere near as much about what I was doing, because it was all much more automatic, if you like.
Yeah.
I was so current at what I was doing that I was so used to doing things that, as I thought to do something, my hand would be moving towards where it needed to go. And it was all much more automatic, I suppose. On this, and particularly at the moment, because I've hardly done any flying since finishing my training on it, I have to think about absolutely everything I'm doing. And I think I could probably speak for other pilots on the 787 as well, that's much more the normal way of things on the 78 anyway, because we don't do anywhere near as many takeoffs and landings. If you look at a 1 hour flight between Adelaide and Melbourne, and think about the number of times you need to do that flight to equate to the one flight that I've just done from Perth to London, which was 17 hours and 46 minutes worth, you can see the problems that are going to be there. The in-between, we're not just sitting there doing nothing. There's lots of stuff to do. We're going across lots of different countries into different airspace and managing things all the way through. So it is a busy environment, but it's busy for different reasons.
Yeah, fantastic. So when you know, can you jump back in and fly if you sort of haven't flown, you know, if you've been kind of, obviously you're not flying as much, or did you need to spend some simulator time before, you know? I mean, because I've heard the stories of, you know, that, I mean, what maybe this is just sort of the media beating it up, but of pilots needing to sort of, you know, maintain their hours and whatnot. Have there been exemptions put in place for that, or is that still something that you need to think of?
There have been some regulations that have been loosened a little bit, and exemptions given for some things. But even with that, the way we've been approaching it at Qantas is we're still trying to meet everything that we would normally be meeting. We'd only use an exemption if we really can't do it. And for me, I had to go and do a simulator before coming to work on this one, because the day before I went to work, actually, my 45-day recency for landings and takeoffs had expired, because it had been 45 days since the last one. So that involves just jumping into a simulator and doing a few things. We have an ongoing licensing program that means we have to do 4 simulators a year, basically. And through that, we cover a whole lot of things that can go wrong with an aeroplane. And over a 3-year period, you tick all the things that you need to tick. So we call it our cyclic training program, and we go through and do our training for that. So that's all still happening as normal. For those of us that have been stood down, if any of those training events were supposed to be completed, they're not whilst we're stood down. But before we get stood back up, or when we're stood back up, we have to then go and do all of that training stuff to actually be able to get used to it again and get into it. Yeah, and I was, particularly given that I'm brand new on the 787, I was rusty when I jumped in the other day, but rusty but comfortable. I still felt comfortable where I was sitting and what I was doing. I still felt competent, and just took a little bit more time to be able to think about things. And you maybe not quite the level of polish that I would normally want to be putting on things, but certainly 100% safe. And if to an outside eye, if you showed the before and after, you probably wouldn't pick a difference, to tell you the truth. I tend to be fairly self-critical, and it's a good thing to be able to sit there and analyse what you've done, and to think, well, maybe I could have done this a bit better, or maybe I could have done that a bit differently. And in fact, as part of what we do, we talk with one another after a flight and say, well, what did you guys think? Any other ways I could have done that? Maybe this wasn't as good as it could be. Maybe I could do that a bit differently. And that's a very healthy thing to do.
Yeah. And I definitely, because obviously for those that are not sure, Guy and I have competed a little bit in tarmac rallies. I've been the co-driver and Guy's been the driver. And I know one of the things that we've both found most satisfying out of that is that aspect of teamwork. So obviously, we can obviously links that in quite nicely, but in the cockpit of the plane, obviously you're not on your own. You've got a crew of people. So can you just sort of run through who is up in the cockpit of a plane, on a long haul flight, and how you all working together? And obviously, you say you're rusty, but obviously, there's a lot of people all there, working together to ensure that obviously the passengers don't notice anything, as you said. So.
It's a very team-based environment, not just on the flight deck. I mean, we have teams outside of that as well. I mean, we have to work with all sorts of other people within the setup. Our cabin crew that are on the aeroplane, the maintenance engineers that are presenting the aeroplane to us, ready to fly, the baggage handling people, the catering people, the ground services staff that check everybody in and do all the boarding, the dispatch people that are putting together flight plans and setting that sort of thing up, the operations control people, our scheduling people that are scheduling people for the flight. So we're dealing with people across a whole lot of areas. But on the aeroplane itself, up the front, in the pointy end, as we call it, aeroplanes these days are built for 2 pilots to be able to fly them. So the minimum crew that we can operate with is a captain and a first officer. So when you go and fly airplanes longer, fatigue starts becoming quite a big issue, and you then need to augment the crew. So the way we've done that in Qantas over the years is we've used second officers who are trained up to a limited level on the aeroplane, in that they're not trained or assessed on landings and takeoffs. In fact, they're not in the seat below 20,000 feet these days. Yeah. And so they're a cruise relief function, really, and from that position, starting, everybody that joins Qantas these days starts there, but you can then bid to move to different parts of the airline, and we have a large deal of say about when we go and do things as well, which is very nice. But so the second officers augment the crew. So normally on the flight that I've just done, we would have had a captain, a first officer, and 2 second officers. And so that's the way that we can do these longer flights, by being able to let people have a break. The first officer has to be able to operate in command of the aeroplane. So they have a command endorsement on the aircraft. So they're like a cruise captain, if you like, that they're discharging all the same roles that pilot in command would be, and when the pilot in command's in the bunk. So they need to be able to do that. The first officer sits in the right-hand seat. The captain sits in the left-hand seat. And the second officers are multi-talented. They sit in both. They can sit in either the left or the right.
So, and how has that changed? Obviously, because in the media, I'm not sure how this is going to develop, but Qantas is quite, in the headlines for Project Sunrise, obviously trying to get from Sydney to Heathrow in one hop. Does that change that role and how you work at all, or is it really just the fact that you have sort of more rotations and more bunk time, and then obviously managing fuel load probably a little closer to the bone too? But
we're actually out on the edge of the envelope, really, with what the 787 can do going from Perth to London. So we've got experience with that sort of thing. Qantas has always been a very long haul operator. So for years, and I pick a different aircraft type, a 707 or a 747, we've always operated them out towards the edge of their range capability. Yeah. So our fuel policy is set up for that, and we're used to doing that. That's the way we operate. But to be able to go Sydney direct London, or Sydney direct to New York, which is what the Sunrise aeroplane will do, the fatigue issue is certainly one that we need to do more work on. So we're putting a lot of effort into research on that sort of stuff. 3 of the aircraft that I'm flying, the 787, their delivery flights have been used in the last 12 months for research to be able to look at exactly that. One of them did fly London direct to Sydney, and 2 of them flew from New York direct to Sydney. So we've had a bit of experience with that. But another way of looking at it is that if we're adding an extra 2 hours, when you divide that up between the people involved on the flight deck, then and the amount of time that they're going to be in the bunk for that, it's actually not a whole lot more. So I'm highly confident we're going to be able to do it.
It's probably more the more those of us that are right at the back of the plane in sort of row third from the back in cattle class that are probably going to have the biggest problems with the with the time.
There's research going on into that as well, in ways to be able to make that as good an experience as it can be for. There's all sorts of things that can be done, everything from when meals are served and what types of meals are served to what we do with the lighting. There's all sorts of stuff that can be done. So, yeah, that's all being looked at.
Yeah, no, very cool.
Would you still choose to sit at the back though, Andrew? Isn't that your spot?
I mean, I've kind of gotten over that, but no, there is a theory. I mean, and tell me if I'm wrong, but whenever you watch those, the big crash videos, it's always the tail section that's intact. So sit up the back; it's the safest place to be. But no, I think definitely the front is certainly more comfortable and probably worth the risk. Realistically, I used to be a bad flyer, but after spending more time with Guy, I've gradually learned that it's perfectly fine. But it's actually we've got a few questions just about the current situation, but I think it's an interesting point to get on the psychology of flying, because I remember when we first started, when I was first co-driving for you, I was not a good flyer in turbulence. I'd get unsettled and I didn't really like it. But I knew the sheer ridiculousness, because I would happily get into a rally car and strap in and go do 150 k's an hour down a tree-laned road through the Adelaide Hills, and I'd be perfectly fine with that. I'd see not a problem with that. Yet when we'd go and fly to Melbourne and we'd hit some turbulence, I'd be like, oh shit,
and be quite comfortable with 360ing on Gorge Road and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's fine, But a bit of a take off, and I remember when you talked me through a flight from Adelaide to Melbourne, and that helped a lot to know that actually all of the noises, everything happens exactly on schedule. It's all meant to happen, and it's Can you go into that the psychology, I guess, around that a little?
You dropped out a little bit during that, Andrew, but I think I got the gist of what you were actually saying. Talking about the way a flight actually works and the psychology of what's going on. I suppose I sort of fall back onto my studies I've done outside of flying airplanes so much and more into the human factors world. But the way people's brains tick with sitting in the back of an airplane, they're not in control, and people that like being in control are more likely to have issues with being in the back of something that they've got no control of. There are actually some very good courses around that people can do if they are having problems with being afraid of flying, and it's a very normal thing for people to be scared of flying. It's something that we see a lot of. Funnily enough, some of the things that I think help best is, as you talked about, with talking through actually the way things work. That helps quite a bit. It also helps if you actually go and visit the flight deck. Now, unfortunately, post 9/11, that's become a really difficult thing to do. We can't do that airborne anymore. But and we're busy when we're on the ground getting things ready to go flying, so it's not easy to do it then. But it's usually possible as you get off. And most pilots won't have a problem if you want to go and have a look, and go and particularly if you say, look, this terrifies me. Is there any way I could have a bit of a look? Usually that won't be a problem to be able to talk it through. And I have had occasions as well where we've had passengers who've been so scared about getting on the aeroplane. We actually get them up to the front, get them to sit down, have a look at what's going on, talk to us a little bit about what we're doing. We show them what the aeroplane does, try and assure them that it's not a problem at all to be in the aeroplane. talk a bit about what the aeroplane's capable of withstanding compared to what gets thrown at it, because they really are much stronger and able to withstand much more than we throw at them.
Yeah.
So those sorts of things, talking to people, you can usually manage to get somebody to calm down quite a bit. And by the time they go and take a seat, they're much better.
Yeah. I remember you saying about the wings, about the flex, how you sort of see them bouncing in the wind, and flex is obviously good for cracks, but the actual angle at which they can flex up to before they will snap is something so ridiculously more than you ever see, even in the worst of the turbulence at all. Like,
you can actually see that online. If you look at Boeing have always tested their wings to destruction. So they put a big hydraulic ram on the tip of it and then bend it right up. And one of the things I often say to people when they're talking about turbulence, and I talk about how much the wingtip moves up and down, and thinking about the number of degrees of up and down that is actually flapping, and try and get them to guess at what angle it actually would break. And on a 777, a Boeing 777, the amount of there's my beast, the 787, but the 777 actually broke at 78 degrees. So if you can, that's almost clapping hands. That's way, way up. That's what I mean about how strong these things are. And as ham-fisted as we might be at some occasions, we're not going to put it to that sort of level.
No.
Well,
it's interesting you talk about getting up to the cockpit and speaking to the pilots, because DS, one of our friends, has gone through a bit of trouble with flying and issues. And I think one of the things that really helped him was actually going and doing simulator sessions, because you can do that now, where there's some cost-effective commercial sims that are out there that give you similar experiences. You can kind of go through that flight start to finish and you know, see what's expected and have someone talking it through with you, which is pretty cool. But I think if I was uneasy ever, the first person to call would be Guy, and he can talk me. I reckon you could put me to sleep, no problem, with a very smooth voice coming over. Okay, Luke, we are descending now. You're calming down. The temperature inside of where you're going is nice and easy, and the time is this.
So what do you, obviously now's just right at this point is a very bizarre time to travel, and you know, in terms of travel restrictions, they're allegedly bringing a 14-day arrival restriction into the UK, much as they have in Australia. What do you have to do? So obviously you're going to set foot in the plane, but it's not like when you get to Australia you're home to the family. You know, what's next? What do you have to do to sort of be able to do this flight at the moment?
One of the massive, or for me, when I get back, I have to go and isolate for 14 days. And that is a big imposition, and that's going to be something that's a big problem as far as being able to get back to international flying. People aren't going to want to have to spend 14 days isolated. The thing about this virus is that it was not called novel for nothing. It is new, and people knew nothing about it. The amount we know about it is increasing very, very rapidly. And how we manage it is also being looked at very closely as well. Draw a parallel, if you like, with things like Ebola, and probably more for people to be able to understand it from a social issue, HIV. When people got HIV, if people put their minds back to the ad with the Grim Reaper, you know, people were going to die.
Yeah.
And
have we lost Guy for a second?
Know how to actually deal with it. I'm still here.
Cool. I think there might be a bit of a
still got
delay.
me?
Carry on. Yeah, carry on. Yeah.
Someone in the hotel's jumped on Netflix or something.
So I think what's going to go on with how we deal with it with aviation is that we're going to have some issues with getting away from this 14-day isolation that we have. I think we'll be able to eventually get to the stage where we can do things that are proven to be able to be as effective as the 14 days has been to be able to get around it. So that will be something that is good. The other big issue is social isolation on board the aeroplane. And I don't know whether anybody's seen anything recently that Alan Joyce has been in the news a bit talking about it. There have been no cases that have been confirmed to have been transmitted on board an aeroplane. So aeroplanes have been not filled with, but have certainly had COVID-19 people on board, but there hasn't been any transmission. So he's mounting a case to be able to say, well, maybe we don't need this social isolation on board aeroplanes if we take other measures, if we use one of these things. And those sorts of measures might be possible.
Well, I mean, that's a big thing for airlines anyway, just in normal flying conditions, ensuring that ventilation is not spreading around someone who's got a cold on the plane and things like that, and ensuring safety of everybody on board. So,
because I think they'll have to deal with, to come at that, because a lot of the airlines, especially the budget carriers over here, your Ryanairs and your EasyJets in the UK, they operate on flying 100% full all the time. Like they barely make a profit on a good day, and as soon as you sort of people talk to, have the middle row free or anything like that, it's it starts to become a bit problematic. So I'm wondering if we've still got Guy, have we?
Might be a bit delayed.
We've got a thumbs up.
I'm still here. It's patchy at best, but I'm still here.
Good.
We'll ask short questions then.
Short questions. Yeah. So, and I guess if anyone from watching on YouTube does have any questions, pop them in the chat. We'll put them to Guy, and happy to chat. But Guy, I guess, did you want to go into a little bit about how the relationship we spoke about motorsport earlier, but your experiences in motorsport and how the two have are assisting each other, I guess.
Yeah, well, I suppose one of the reasons I like tarmac rally so much, I mean, it would be the same in the dirt rally. Well, I haven't done any dirt rally, but I'd imagine it carries across there as well. The teamwork is the thing. That's one of the things I really enjoy most about it. It's excellent to be able to get into a car and work with somebody else with synergy, such that you can be pushing that thing along so much quicker than you could be doing if you were just sitting there doing it by yourself. And there's nothing better than getting to the end of a stage where everything has just clicked. And I'm thinking Castenbull, Andrew.
Yes.
And you get to the end of the stage and you think, well, that was good. That was really good. And so I think the teamwork side of things that I've been used to in aeroplanes for years has been very helpful to be able to push me along with that. I think also the technical side of things. I've always been not what I'd call strong as far as my own mechanical abilities are concerned. I have been known to call myself a mechanical idiot, but having a technical knowledge of things from the aviation world certainly flows across into what goes on with cars. And I've actually always enjoyed the challenge of taking something that wasn't built to be fast to try and improve it. And with an old car, that's not easy because there's not as much choice for what you can do with replacing components. And you'll replace something and think, oh, good, that's nice and strong and powerful. And then that has an effect on down the line. The gearbox doesn't like what's happening, and the gearbox is fine. Oh, the diff is no good. The grippy tyres are no good. The brakes need to be uprated. The brakes are too good. They're actually affecting the suspension setup. So harmonising the old cars to make them go quicker, I think, is a real challenge. And that's something that has sucked me into it in a big way over the years. I really enjoy that very much to my bank balance's chagrin.
Well, I guess if we're talking motorsport challenges, we might as well. It's an absolutely beautiful looking car, the rally car, the Alfa Romeo 2600 Sprint. So for those, most people are not familiar with it. It's not a 105. It's not the 4-cylinder, sort of the more common. This is an earlier design. It's a straight 6, 2.6 litre, really sharing more of its engine heritage from the earlier sort of 6C cars of the 40s, more so than the 60s and 70s. And this was a very high-end luxury grand touring, classic car. They have been raced a few times, but not commonly. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this project?
I'll bring up some pictures from AGR, Andrew.
Yeah,
not many people have been stupid enough to do one. I think is the reason that there's very few of them around. But I love that. That's part of the challenge. That to me, you could easily go out and pick something that is really, really good and easy to turn into a nice, quick, reliable tarmac rally car. But where's the challenge? To me, that is a real challenge, and I love doing that. And I like doing something that's a little bit different, which is why it appealed to me in the first place. It's not built to be able to do what it's now doing, but it's still got a little bit to go, and quite a lot to go in terms of development. There's still much more capability in the car. But if you do it all at once, then where's the enjoyment over the years? You get to the point where you think, oh, well, I've done that, so what do I do now? A sensible person would just drive it and enjoy it, and then move on to build another one.
So I guess the question, and the thing through this project, and Luke's bringing up, maybe Guy can talk us through sort of what's been done to the car to make it a rally car. But
this is where we found it, isn't it?
This is where it was found. It was dragged out of a shed down in Bordertown in country South Australia. But I guess the point I was sort of trying to make is that for most cars, your Escorts and even the Alpha 105s and 911s, there is someone who's done it before. You can pick up the phone, you can jump on a forum, you can ask someone the question, but the whole step through this project, no one has done this before. So there's literally nobody to ask what to do or nobody's mistakes to learn from. You really are on your own. Like, how did that go?
It all started at a magnificent lunch at Primo Estate. Thank you very much, Joe Grilly. Fantastic. Sitting next to Peter Axford, who, as the long-suffering owner of Eurosport Automotive, who had done all sorts of wonderful things with a little Fiat 124 Sport for me over the years, and had been a little bit bemused, I think, when I decided I was going to sell it. And when I said to him, I'm thinking about the idea of an Alpha 2600, he looked at me and said, go to the person you sold the Fiat to and offer to pay twice as much to buy it back. And Peter is a much, much wiser person than I'll ever be. So there was much wisdom in what he said, but he's also a long-suffering person and an Alfa Romeo person through and through. So there was a certain part of him that was really quite attached to the idea of being able to do this stupid thing. So he actually located the car, and we looked at it, and it was pretty moth-eaten and rat-eaten and needed a lot of attention. But we made a plan, and as you said, Andrew, it's something that hasn't been done. So every step of the way on building that car was trying to come up with a way around all sorts of issues with it, trying to build it to a particular specification within Tarmac Rally to keep it at a limited modified level. The suspension, for example, had to maintain the kingpin front suspension. So trying to be able to do that and get some negative camber involved,
because it has positive
enormously
camber.
Challenging.
Yeah,
and,
had positive camber.
The guys at Eurosport Automotive did. And the photos that you're showing there are actually also at another area where the guys did an absolutely fantastic job on this car for me, and they've done work on other cars for me as well. Pierce Crash. And the guys at Pierce Crash did an absolutely fantastic job in very quick time to be able to take a very beaten up old body and get it to the stage where we could put a cage in it and go racing.
Because it was like Swiss cheese, that car. It was pretty.
Oh, yeah. You could see daylight through all sorts of bits in it.
It's actually quite interesting looking at these photos and just bring up memories and forgetting. Like looking at it now, I just could not remember how poor the body was.
And I guess it's like any project, once you embark on it and start pulling it apart and getting into it, you then learn the true nature of what you've embarked on into it. But so what's been done on the car, and where's it at the moment? What's
the car at the moment is sitting at. The car at the moment is sitting at BRM, and the latest thing that we're doing with it is replacing the gearbox, because after years of trying to be able to get the gearbox to actually perform, a 105 series gearbox within it, It's just not handling the pace. Every time I use it, we need to pull it out and synchros a shot. It all needs to be redone.
And
so
we know that's not a fun job.
No.
The other thing is that with this rebuild, Luke, you'll be really pleased to hear that with the rebuild of the gearbox setup, we're going to be able to make it such that the gearbox will be much easier to get in and out of the car. So I'm very happy about that.
Well, that's a nice segue into a story which I guess sums
very
up
painful. I'm going to go rock in the corner for a minute. Hang on.
The benefits of rallying a 2600 sprint. So I guess I'll set the scene, and then Guy and Luke can chip in. Obviously, Targa Tasmania 2017. It was weeks before I moved to the UK, and it was the big thing. We're going to do this, and we had a great 3 opening days. The car was running fantastically. It was finally showing some speed out of it. We were doing really well, and then I remember where we were coming at the bottom, there was a creek crossing and then an acceleration up, and it was just all the grinding noises, and it was just the most awful mechanical abuse noise of a gearbox letting go is just something I never ever want to experience again. And so that led us on to a wild sort of couple of days of trying to get this sorted in the middle of rural Tasmania.
Well, we've basically broken down quite a fair way away from everybody, but luckily we had that shed with Cole, didn't we? Which was great up in Penguin.
Yeah.
Cole Gabberty, RIP. He's no longer with us. Cole, the father of Nigel Gabberty, who I had my school years with, 4 years in the boarding house at school in Launceston, and then I was a day student for the last 2. And then at university as well before I headed off to the Air Force later on. So Nigel is an old mate of mine. His father, Cole, used to take us to the Speedway when we were kids, and had always been involved with things, and was always a fantastic mechanic with minimum tools. He could do all sorts of things. On one of the Targa Tasmania competitions in the Fiat 124, I'd had a starter motor refurbished in Queensland before heading down. And the starter motor started to give us some grief, and we parked it at the casino in Hobart at the end of one of the days, and I had to go off and do something else. Cole, who's by this stage in his 70s, who only had the tools that were in the back of the car at the time, in a very dark environment in the car park, no jack or anything like that, managed to crawl under the car and with the bonnet open as well, managed to get the starter motor out of a Fiat 124, which Luke will attest to is not actually all that easy, with a minimum number of tools. By the time I got back, the other thing that Cole was always great with was an absolutely brilliant turn of phrase. And I walked up and he just looked at me, handed me the starter motor and said, "Here, give this to someone you don't like."
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was so handy to have that shed, because we basically had to trailer the car from... What stage was it on? I can't remember where it was now.
Castro.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Castro.
Yeah. And I think there was a picture here where we had the car on the trailer. That was it. Waiting to get picked up, and there we go. Outside of Sprent, Tasmania. Beautiful place. Beautiful place. Not a bad place to break down. Actually, it was really quite nice.
Andrew, Sprint is right near that place that you absolutely love when we did recce. Remember that the house with the graveyards in the front yard?
Oh, yes. That's yeah. So those... we're expanding on about 4 stories here, but parts of Tasmania are it's a beautiful, absolutely beautiful place. It's a lovely place, but there are very definitely parts that are very rural, shall we say. And we were driving past and noticed a rather weatherboard house with tombstones in the front yard, which was it gets your attention when there's no phone coverage around. But anyway,
so we trailered the Sprint to Cole's place, which was in Penguin, and managed to get the gearbox out, which was. What time did we get that out? It was about 11 o'clock at night. It was getting on pretty late, and we got it apart during the power. Yeah, that was right. Forgot about that. Yeah, we were doing we got there and it was like, yes, we've got a shed. It's great, but power's out. So it was freezing cold. We're on the concrete floor. We had minimal light, and we're underneath trying to get everything apart. And we got the gearbox apart, found out that it was a stripped input shaft for it. And then you and Andrew legged it off to a guy who had some 105 gearboxes and tried to find something that would work. And
we drove
just
hours.
How many hours was it? I can't remember.
I was going to say, Guy, as a pilot, obviously fatigue management is something I've definitely picked up from you. But doing 3/4 of a day of rallying, then to break down, to tow the car, to then spend, Guy, we were kind of useless in this, just kind of bringing drinks and handing tools and that. But still, in a cold workshop for, then to drive a return trip of sort of 4 or 5 hours to pick up a spare gearbox that I guess we hoped we would sort of swap into the car, to then discover that it was, the bespoke input shaft.
The bespoke input shaft. So, because it's basically the 2600, for people that don't know, is a 6-cylinder version of like a 105 Nord motor. It's pretty close, and the gearbox itself is the same, but the bell housing and the input shaft is different. So luckily Chantel was coming up to Tasmania anyway, and managed to grab an input shaft and fly it over, and we ended up finishing. There's a picture here, and there's a really good that's the wrong way. There's a really good video that we did where we just took time lapse, what are they called? Time lapse time lapse photos of the whole build saga. So we ended up getting to Hobart and rebuilding the gearbox inside of Guy's parents' garage, which thankfully had carpet on the floor and was warm, and you could shut the roller door, and there was cold beer at the end of it, which was probably the best bit.
Actually, Luke, I think my dad's still wondering about a few bottles of wine that were in the shed that he couldn't quite account for after all of that was done.
No, that definitely wasn't me. I didn't do any of the wine.
I have to have a huge shout out here to the other person who was the we that Luke's referring to of pulling all this thing all apart, James Wiltshire, who did an absolutely fantastic job with what was involved with that as well. Yeah. And I think it would be an incomplete story if we didn't talk about the realisation about where the exhaust system for the car was once we'd driven about halfway between the two sheds.
I don't remember that. What happened? I was probably too exhausted by that point to
tell me that it wasn't with you.
So I guess we need to sort of explain the story. We stripped the gearbox apart. Well, the boys, Luke and James, stripped the gearbox apart, discovered that it was the input shaft. So Chantel, my now fiance, was flying in the 2 days time to spectate to see the finish. So we had her bring a spare input shaft from Adelaide. But obviously we were in the north of Tasmania, north of the island, and the event was moving to the south of the island. And there are it's not an super easy place to get around. There's only kind of one road in, one road out. So we made the decision to tow the car without the gearbox down to the south of Tasmania. To then, when the input shaft would arrive, we'd build the gearbox up and put it back together. But yeah, I think what Guy's alluding to is that the question of a couple of hours down the road of did you put the exhaust system on the trailer? And there's a bit of a quizzical look around the car about, no, I thought you did.
My father and I jumped, did a U-turn, went back and picked up the exhaust system. And I don't think I mucked around actually on that drive too much because I think you guys only finished up in Hobart about half an hour ahead of us.
Yeah, it was. I remember that.
And I guess it's an interesting point about, we've had guests on our podcast talking about rally before and these adventures that you kind of go on and end up having. But, Guy, I remember distinctly during that you had, we mentioned earlier a bit around fatigue management. And I guess it's something as a pilot where we were very much gung-ho, sort of, we're a bit younger back then and thinking, no sleep, we'll jump on helmets, we'll make it for competition, and we had a plan.
We'll rebuild it that night in Penguin.
We theoretically could have turned up the next day with no sleep and competed for a full day. And I remember you were very rigid about the fact of just saying like, no, that's a stupid thing to do. Like, we're not racing for sheep stations. We're just going to then, that's how people get killed or hurt. And I remember you sort of being, can you go into a bit of that sort of risk management, which I think is something definitely unique to pilots that I've known.
Yeah, well, I guess risk management itself, likelihood and consequence, and I suppose in the context of what we were talking about as well, the pain and gain side of things comes into it as well. So risk itself, if you're looking at the likelihood of something happening and whether that's high or not, and then the consequences of what goes on and whether that's high or not. So something might be pretty unlikely, but if the consequences are devastating, then you really shouldn't do it. So that sort of risk management side of things from that perspective, but throw fatigue into the mix. And I remember we sat around in Penguin at that lovely place that we were renting on the coast there. That was a beautiful spot. We sat there and had a bit of a team meeting about what to do with this. And we stepped through what we'd actually need to do to be able to get the part, to be able to fix it, and then to be able to get the car to Strawn to be able to start that particular day. And it would have involved the maximum amount of sleep we would have been able to get was 2 hours. And we would then jump in and do Strawn, Queenstown, and Mount Arrowsmith, which is the longest tarmac rally stage in the country, in trying conditions, and then the rest of the day on from there. Compare that to skip those 3 stages, although they're iconic stages, and I would just have loved to have done them. Instead of doing that, do it in Hobart. And drive from Hobart to New Norfolk, pick the stage that was up at lunch, and finish the day from there. And as you said, the sheep stations were not involved. I mean, I think it just was something that I had to make a call on balance about the risks that we'd be taking and for what real gain. So we were out of the contention to be able to do anything. So I was really looking at the best way to be able to still really enjoy what was going on without absolutely knackering ourselves at the same time.
Yeah, and I guess that's a series, because I've heard you talk about before, but when you're flying those long hauls, and you sort of mentioned earlier that it's actually very busy up on the flight deck. Are you constantly evaluating these things in terms of fuel burn? And I know, routes in terms of various geopolitical situations and which countries you're going to fly around, and likelihood and weather, and looking at the possibility and chance for storms and how that's going to affect on, and you're just sort of constantly making these sort of assessments of sort of risk versus reward, as you're flying all the time. It's kind of second nature, is it all?
Yeah, there's all of those things that you're talking about going on all at the same time. And going around weather is actually something that becomes quite an interesting thing to be able to do. And skill of using the radar is really important, because if you're not very good with using the radar, you can end up going around something that's not even there. You can be well above it, or just the way the radar returns work, knowing how that actually works, because every mile that you go off track is one you've got to do to get back onto track. And that's adding to your flight time. So you're burning more fuel going around weather. And if you're already tight on fuel at the start, then that becomes really quite difficult. So you've got to balance that sort of thing out. Having said that, we have the most enormous amount of respect for those big storms because they really can be very threatening to the safety of the airplane. So flying around those is not optional. You have to, but there's ways to be able to do it in an efficient manner. And there's an old saying that we actually had lessons on this concept back on pilot's course on airmanship. And the definition of airmanship is the safe and efficient operation of the aircraft. So there's always that trade-off stuff that you've got to be looking at. Safety, yes, absolutely, but you've also got to be able to operate in an efficient manner. And the best balance of those things, if you look at it, that's really risk management as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess I also, we're going to jumping around a little bit, but it's a good time to sort of ask about your history with flying, because I know, when did you mentioned earlier you're in the RAF and you got your wings, and so yeah, what did you fly before you became to join Qantas and sort of fly commercial?
Well, going right back at school, I was always interested in the idea of being a pilot, but the more the years went by at school, the more my marks were looking good for it, and teachers and sort of other bits and pieces involved pushed me towards the idea of being a medical student. And the highlight of my medical career really was getting in. I went off to Hobart as a first-year medical student, had a great year. Thank you to all of the guys at Christ College that year. That was a magnificent year. But halfway through first-year med, I went off to the Air Force to go and apply to become a pilot. And they sat me down and asked me what I was doing, and I explained. And they said, "Oh, well, you need to go to the academy then. You can go and do all." And I said, "No, I've come to apply to be a pilot." And so, "Oh, yes, you'll be a pilot, but you do your degree first." "No, I want to join to fly aeroplanes." And I'm not quite sure why I was so certain of that at that stage, because I'd never flown one.
Yeah.
But something just within me has always wanted to do that. And it was something that I just thought, if I don't go and do this, I'm always going to wonder what it would have been like, and I'll regret it. I need to do this. So off I went in May of '85, started on officer training school at Point Cook in Victoria, flew the CT4 at one FTS, one flying training school at Point Cook. Then after Christmas at home, headed over to Western Australia, to Pearce Air Force Base, and flew the Mackie jet trainer through to August of '86, which is when I graduated with my wings. And I was posted to fly C-130E Hercules. So I flew the Herc for about 4 years.
Yeah.
Had lots of good overseas trips, which I enjoyed very much, and made some lifelong friends through that. Really, my pilot's course buddies are like brothers to me, and that we were together for such an intense time, and all under the same pressures, and had such a lot in common. So my pilot's course buddies are my nearest and dearest, but then my squadron mates over the years as well. Still have a lot of very good friends from those days.
Yeah.
And flying the Hercules is great. Such a versatile aeroplane. Can be operating in and out of a dirt strip one moment and into an international airfield the next. It looks big and slow and cumbersome, but it's got full hydraulic controls. You can throw the thing around quite a bit, and it's actually just a delight to be in. And the other big thing was a crew of 5 people at least.
Wow.
2 pilots, flight engineer, navigator, and loadmaster. And that crew element is a very strong thing for me. And that is what's flowed on to with what we've done with motorsport. You know what it's been like co-driving with me. That's something I really get a lot out of, and it does remind me very much of that environment. So after flying the Herc, I had a couple of years in a ground position teaching aviation medical stuff, because by that stage I was also getting into human factors and behavioural science type stuff. So that married in well with what I was doing outside of the Air Force at uni, and then off to fly the Boeing 707, and the role there included air-to-air refueling, general transport worldwide, and VIP as well. So got to fly a few interesting people around the place.
Ooh,
Cool.
Who?
Actually, no, it doesn't matter about the VIPs. I'm more interested to hear about air-to-air refueling. I think there's a lot of people out there who would love to hear the intricacies of how that works, because that just is surely the pinnacle of just cool aviation shit is air-to-air refueling. Like that's.
Well, fighter pilots would disagree with you that that's just necessary for them to be able to go and do what they really have to do. But flying the 70, doing the air-to-air refueling, again, the teamwork side of things with it was very important, and not just amongst the 70 crew, but also working with the fighter pilots. We would brief beforehand with them, and then go and do what we were going to do. And it's a great mission-enhancing device for the fighter guys to be able to give them fuel, even if it's just. We used to do quite a lot of just flying up to Catherine, the Air Force Base at Tyndall, take off, sit up at 25,000 feet above the airfield. The fighters would take off, come up, and a lot of the fuel that they burn is actually on takeoff. So they'd be able to come up, top off their tanks, and that then gave them a lot more time to be able to go and do the stuff that was really important to them, which involved all of the fighter pilot stuff. So working with the fighter pilots doing that was really interesting. Flying the aeroplane, the first time I was involved with doing any tanking, the thing that I wasn't ready for was the thump that goes through the airframe when they plug in. And I thought about it for a while. I mean, that hose is sitting there full of fuel, and it's reasonably rigid. And the way it works is that they plug into the basket, then push it forward, which is what starts the fuel flow. But when they actually plug into that basket, your aircraft has just been hit by another one. So that's why there's a big vibration through the whole airframe.
Yeah.
And that was actually something I wasn't quite prepared for. But a very interesting thing to do. We would tank at night as well. We had infrared cameras that we used for that to be able to keep an eye on what was going on with the fighter positioning. The rejoins were lots of fun as well. Fighters coming from all sorts of different angles. A head-to-head rejoin with the fighters turning to come in behind you. They're already well and truly into the turn by the time they go scooching underneath you. And if you look at the speed of a 707 through the air with a fighter coming towards it, the closing speed is pretty eye-watering.
You wouldn't even see it. It'd just be a boom straight there. That's so. How do you when you're flying? Obviously, there's not many pilots out there who would need to account for a plane that's getting lighter as they fly. So it's not just a weather. Obviously, it's like a motorsport type. You talk about Formula One drivers adjusting braking points and anti-roll bar settings for lightning fuel load. But obviously, you're one of the few pilots that have had to do that in a plane at such a rapid rate. How do you account for that?
Funnily enough, all pilots have to do what the Formula One guys have to do, because all pilots, unless you're flying a glider, you're burning fuel.
Sure.
And if you have a look at that wing sitting there on the 70, it's got a nice big angle on it, and all of the fuel, there's a center tank that sits underneath, but a lot of the fuel is sitting out in the wings. So as you burn the fuel, the center of gravity of the airplane changes quite significantly. So that affects the trim of the airplane quite a bit as well. So that has to be managed. And the trim of the aeroplane has to be worked out for the takeoff condition and also the landing condition. So after all of that fuel gets burnt, I mean, we loaded nearly 100 tons of fuel in Perth the other day, and by the time we got here to Heathrow, we only had about 8 tons left. Wow. So that's actually quite a good fuel load to arrive with in Heathrow. After that, it's usually quite a bit lower than that. We don't push the edge of what we could possibly do, but that's a lot of fuel to actually burn. And the other thing that does is it improves the aeroplane's capability as far as its altitude is concerned. We climbed initially to 34,000 feet on the way out of Perth, and gradually, as we became lighter all the way up to Heathrow, we ended up at 42,000 feet. So wow. The capability of the aircraft as it gets lighter changes quite significantly. The thing that's different with tanking is that you very, very quickly lose a whole heap of your weight. So that's actually quite different. And part of that as well was returning the aeroplane into its normal fuel flow situation. And the flight engineer was always very busy with doing that sort of thing on the 70. The things I'm flying these days are a lot more automated with what goes on with that. Sometimes the automation doesn't work as it should, and there are things that we can accept that are not working. And we have a minimum equipment list that says these are things we must have, but if something's broken, we can actually have a workaround that will enable us to still go and to work around that problem. That might give us some limitations on altitude or how far away from an airfield we can fly and things like that, but we still can do these things.
Yeah. That's very, very cool. So you've done the 70, and then what was next after that?
Well, after the 70, I joined Qantas, and for 6 years I was a second officer on the 747-400. So the old Queen of the Skies, as they call it. Not flying at the moment for Qantas. Still may again. They haven't announced anything officially yet. Yeah. But these days a pretty old aeroplane and burns a fair bit of fuel for what it can carry. So 6 years as a second officer on that, and a lot of flying to London through Singapore and Bangkok, and a lot of flying to Los Angeles. So the long haul operation side of things. From there, I went to the 737, and I had 4 years as a first officer on the 73, based in Brisbane. And towards the end of that, my wife, Michelle, had been doing her specialty training as a radiologist, and we were thinking about what we wanted to do long term, where we wanted to live. And Qantas had bases in various places. One place they didn't have a base was Adelaide, but Michelle was from Adelaide, and I was born there as well. My extended family are in Adelaide. And I was the one that actually said to Michelle, well, what about Adelaide? And I saw the look in her eyes and just thought, what have I done? I've committed myself to commute for the rest of my career. So I went off to the A330 Airbus, and I spent 10 years commuting as a first officer on the A330. The A330 was a magnificent machine to be on. The route structure on it was magnificent. Went as far west as Mumbai, went as far east as New York, but mixed it in with quite a bit of domestic flying as well. So as far as the number of takeoffs and landings are concerned, I was able to feel quite current with what I was doing. As we were talking about earlier on, that the domestic flying, you get a lot more takeoffs and landings, so you actually feel more current with what you're doing, which was nice, and really good blend of everything. But then I was wrong. They did have a base in Adelaide. The 737 Adelaide base was announced, and I was right at the right spot to be able to take a position there as a captain. So I did my training to do that, and 5 years as a captain on the 737 in Adelaide. And then I was thinking about about whether to maybe make a move to back into the long haul side of things. And I thought to myself, Perth basing on the 787, if I had to commute to Perth for the rest of my career, could I do that? I thought, well, yeah, I think I could do that. Then I thought, if I don't put my hat in the ring for this, and someone junior to me, because it's based on seniority, if someone junior to me gets that position, how's it going to make me feel? I thought, I don't think I like that very much. So here I am on the 787.
Yep, fantastic, and it's it's certainly working very well. And you've how many flights have you got under your belt, just sort of just getting into the swing of things, and then obviously here we are at the moment. So yeah, all up in the air, I guess. But
exactly, pardon the pun. Yeah, I mean, after checking out, I had to do 4 sectors of consolidation flying, and that involved doing a trip up to Hong Kong and back, and then I managed to get to London right at the end before things shut down, and that was already to the stage where we couldn't leave the hotel, and then after getting back from that was it. Didn't fly again until this trip now.
Yeah, fantastic. And then here we are. So, all right, Luke, Guy, anything else to cover? What else would you like to talk about? If you've got any questions, anyone pop them in. We're happy to pop them to Guy. What do you reckon, guys?
So you were talking before about the development of the 2600, and you're saying you enjoy that aspect of it, and it's at BRM at the moment and stuff. What are some of the challenges and things that you're working through with the car at the moment? Try and improve the car.
Well, the gearbox definitely, with the synchros being a consumable, was not a good thing. So fixing that up, and we have that in train at the moment. By the sounds of things, we've got a gearbox that we hope will work, a T50 gearbox, a Toyota T50 out of an AE86. So hopefully that will do the job and fix that side of things up. Then from there, it's pretty much sorted, I hope, as far as what we want to do. There's still a few things to fiddle around with it to try and get the handling to be as good as it possibly can be. It's not bad as it is. We did put a lot of effort into getting good suspension onto it, a lot of effort and money into getting good suspension into it from the start. And Oscar Ferranotto at Super Shock worked his magic, and I'm very happy with the suspension setup that we've got. But we've got plenty of capability to play with it. And Mark Rundle and his guys at BRM, first and foremost in that sort of field, particularly an open wheeler setup. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what we might be able to achieve together to be able to sort that out. Yeah. So that side of things. I haven't got any events actually planned at the moment, but I do know of a couple of events that are on back home in Adelaide that I'm keeping an eye on. I'm really sort of keeping my options a bit open because of what's going on with flying at the moment as well, and I've got to see what's happening with that. I think
the super sprints on in September, the rally sprint.
Yeah, the Gorge Rally Sprint in September, and then Adelaide Rally is on as well. And they're events that I would really like to do. The other issue is some clown of a co-driver moved to the UK and left me high and dry. The Gorge Rally Sprint that's on, I did actually enter that last year, and Sam Winter very kindly offered to come and get involved with the whole setup for that. That ended badly, unfortunately. Of all the stupid things that you could possibly do, I managed to pull into a service station, and with the seating position that I had, it was not easy to actually to sight certain things, particularly like bollards that were sitting on the left-hand side of the car, which I drove straight into.
Well,
I mean, in front of the 2600. So that was
I wasn't going to bring that up, but since you did.
Well, you know what, I can, and Andrew, you can attest to this as well, but sitting in that car at the height that we are, I mean, I'm just nudging 6 and you're 6. What are you, 6'2", and guys 4'3", and it's and I struggled like when I drove the car to the Burger Meet, like it was like it's tough to see out, and you're constantly kind of like looking over and going because you're sitting so far down. So yeah, I totally appreciate how that happened. Yeah,
you're so far back in the car as well. The seat is
like
almost
a long bonnet out the front of you, and
it's a long way back. So the seating position is not easy. But I have actually raised the seat since then and driven it as a tour leader in Adelaide Rally last year, and the driving position is way better with the seat up a bit. So I'm quite confident that that'll be okay from now.
I must admit, as soon as I saw that picture, my first reaction was, I can see how that happened. Like I was like, I can see exactly how that happened.
Look, it's embarrassing, and the photo you can see of it there with the poor thing. There's no protection for anything there at all, so it all just pushed in, and the oil cooler's sitting right behind that left headlight, so the oil everywhere. Again, a big shout out to the people at Pierce Crash, that Peter and Dennis that have managed to get that thing sorted out, and he wouldn't know it had happened. It's absolutely beautiful work. Guys that know how to still unbend bent metal and return it to something that's beautiful. So
well, it's not like you can go with that car and just replace a panel or a fender or a nose cone or anything. I mean, I think the story of the bonnet is an interesting one in terms of that on production line prototyping type thing that happened in that era. I mean, the guy, did you want to run through that story? I'm happy to tell it if you don't want to, but
yeah, sure, Luke, no problem at all. We're very, very lucky that car just happened to have what I haven't been able to find any others in the world that have got it the same way in its setup. The 2600 had a couple of different iterations. The one that this is, the 2600 Sprint, is a coupe. There's also a Spider version, and that used a lot more of the parts that I think we've got on this car. There was a company called Touring that made lightweight parts, so-called superleggera parts for the cars. A tubular frame with a skin over the top of that, and a lightweight aluminium skin. And that's what we've got on this car. So we're very, very fortunate to have it. And I don't know of any others with a 2600 that have got that on a 2600 coupe. I do know of Spiders that have that for sure. They also played around with that for the boot, but the boot on my car is a big old heavy one. But the bonnet certainly nice and light, which is good given that the weight distribution on the car, it's got a long snout, a long engine, and the weight distribution helps. It helps a lot having a bonnet that is not putting as much weight on the forward part of the car.
Because you'd actually bought a steel bonnet to put on there, because that one was a bit wonky, wasn't it?
Yeah, I did, but it didn't fit because it was a different shape to the other one. If anyone wants a new old stock 2600 Sprint bonnet, I've still got it.
It sounds like a good garage ornament to me.
You know, that story, I think, just shows, I think, why I love these cars so much, but also why it's been such a tough project, because no two are the same. It's not like a production line car where you can get it, you can interchange this stuff. I still remember that you got that bonnet thinking that it's going to be easier to just put a new one on it than fix this old one. And it was a wholly different shape. Like it just simply didn't fit, like it's
and
that was back in the time when it was all handmade, and
and that was probably
do you remember sitting there with the Dremel?
I think Andrew's got photos of that somewhere too, but that was probably like my most nervous moment ever working on a car, was ripping apart motors, rebuilding motors, doing gearboxes, whatever, but sitting there with a wheel of death on a Dremel and a brand new painted, just been straightened out, one-off aluminium 2600 bonnet, and having to cut out to put the bonnet pins in it. Oh man, that was so stressful. Did it though?
You did a beautiful job of
it. Yeah, we did all right with that. I don't think that was too bad. Hopefully that's something that BRM doesn't have to change. Who put these silly things on here? They just hacked at
it. It does look very good. But in terms of future of what I'm going to do with the car, those other rallies I've talked about that would look really really good to be able to do. But there's one that's still sitting there for me that I really have got unfinished business with. That's Targa Tas. I've been there 4 times for no plate, and those that have done Targa would attest to the number of people that at the end saying, "How'd you go? Did you get your plate?" And for those that haven't heard of this in the past, all of the 40-odd stages of Targa Tas over 6 days, if you complete each one of those stages within a certain time, the trophy time for that stage, which is not an outrageous time to actually be able to finish within, but if you manage to finish every stage within the time, you get a plate. And if you do that 3 times, you get a golden plate, and it goes on. There are some people that have achieved enormous arrays of Targas in a row, and my respect for them is very high indeed. It's not an easy thing to do. It is such a marathon. It is a fatiguing event, and it's very hard on crew, both in the car and outside it, and also on the car itself. And only there's thousands of corners in a Targa Tasmania. You stuff up one of them, and it's all over.
Yeah, definitely.
So unfinished business, and that's one that I'd like to get back to.
Yeah, fantastic. Definitely. I know for me, I was certainly amazed at, there's just so many things that can go wrong, and I think especially doing it in an old car as well. I think now a lot of the newer, more modern cars, they have air conditioning and sort of reliable, that's still a challenge, but then to coax an older sort of car through it as well, it's really not just a test of the cruise and all that, but a test of the car as well, and the preparation, and there's just so many things that can go wrong. So
it's really interesting actually to talk to people that have done Targa in the past, in old cars, in classics, and have moved on to do Targa in modern cars, and talking about things like, it's getting a bit hot, we'll put the air conditioning on, and not at stage, but it's a different event in a modern car to what it is in a classic, and the classic numbers have dwindled so much over the years. I can remember in 2005. Being in a field of 161 classic cars. That's just the classics, not the overall field. So that's the numbers of people that used to do events like that, and the number of classic cars that were out there. I'm very keen to continue to be able to do these events. It needs to be able to fit in around other things that I'm doing, and I guess I also need a co-driver. So. I am interested in, if anyone is watching and badly wants to be a 2600 co-driver, I will be open to offers.
Yeah, no,
absolutely.
Good. Cool. All right. Yeah. Well, I think we what do you reckon, boys? I think we've got a show.
Yeah, mate, I got one more. I reckon guys got the car like the car of the next decade, like the sports cool car. Can we talk about that? Like,
Yeah.
So I mean,
of course.
Andrew and I, we sit there on like car sales and Gumtree and eBay and look at cars, and we were quite surprised by the value in 360 manual coupes.
And here he's talking about a Ferrari.
Yeah. And always saying, that'd be a great car to get, and engines aren't as bad, they don't need as much as the 355. 355s are getting expensive. The 360s we think will age well, and then lo and behold,
guy bought the car that
I bought the car. What's that been like? Because that's first kind of I guess Ferrari experience for you, and ownership, and I guess having a pseudo semi-car, a supercar.
Yeah, it's something that I fell in love with it. I mean, I've had a few moments in life where I call them my Toad of Toad Hall moments, where I see something and I just go, and, Michelle, my long-suffering wife, can attest to this. But, she sat there as we're in Strawn for my mother's 60th birthday celebration. She picked a bit of an out-of-the-way spot to go to. It just so happened that was the day that Targa came to town, and so the Strawn stage was starting on the edge of Strawn. So I went out there, and I remember having Lucy on my shoulders, my 17-year-old daughter. If she wouldn't hang in there. But we were sitting there watching the cars start, and a friend of mine from Qantas in his beautiful Monaro pulled up, and hadn't noticed that I was standing on the side of the road. So I just walked over and stuck my head in the window and said, "Not bad for a 767 driver," and gave him a bit of but I just looked at it, and Michelle could see the look on my face, and she knew that I was going to have to go and do Targa. So sure enough, now that was 2002, and by 2004, there I was doing Targa. So I had a similar thing when we were on a holiday in Italy, and we went to Modena, and that was actually planned so that I could go a little bit out of town from Modena to Maranello. And I had the opportunity to go for a drive in a 430, actually. It did a couple of things. One was it put me off ever buying anything with paddle shift. I didn't like that very much. But the other thing it did is made me go, wow, I really love to have one of these sort of things. So I started looking with a bit of an idea of looking at something, anything around about the 355, 360 sort of era. And the 360 really did it for me for a lot of the reasons that you were talking about, Luke. As far as being easier to maintain, it was really the first Ferrari where they really thought about it and making it easier for the person that owns it. And I've loved it. I haven't driven it much. I'm not going to drive it much, but when I do drive it, I really love driving it. I'm not going to turn the driver aids off. I will not be that guy.
Risk reward.
But I do really enjoy driving it. But I suppose my taste in these sorts of things, and I mean, I do love Italian cars very much so, and I've shown that with what I've been involved with in the past, and the Fiat Dino Coupe that's under restoration. That's I should never have bought, and I should never have put as much money into as I have so far.
And developing here.
But one day that thing will be finished. Just not at the moment, because it's costing far too much money to be able to even think about it at the moment. But I will eventually one day drive that thing, which I'm very much looking forward to as well. But on the other side of things, the sort of the yin and the yang, if you like, I've always, going back to Cole Gabberty actually, and going to the speedway at Latrobe in the past, I used to love watching those things, the super sedans rumbling around the oval track, and the car that I particularly liked was a Corvette Stingray, and I've always had a thing about Corvettes. So yes, I have committed that as well. So 1971 Corvette big block 454, and I love driving that just as much as I love driving the Ferrari, but for very different reasons. And I really enjoy being able to jump in that and go and drive that, and think, wow, that was great. And then a month down the track, go and jump in the Ferrari and drive that, and wow, that's great too, but for all sorts of different reasons.
What are the reasons? What are the reasons you like both? Because they're quite polar opposite cars. I mean, very polar opposite cars. What
Ferrari?
No, well, both of them. Like, what are the yin and the yang? Like, what do you like about the Ferrari? What do you like about the Corvette that produces those feelings of excitement for you and joy and euphoria?
Corvette is a big banger that just you could have it in second gear and just let the clutch out, and it just boom, 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 and away it goes. And it cruises along just beautifully. It's absolutely magnificent on a summer's day with the Targa top off and the windscreen out at the back, just cruising along at low speed over the bumpy roads of McLaren Vale. And the beautiful thing about it as well that Michelle really likes is that there's no boot. So we can go winery touring on around the place in the Corvette. There's nowhere for me to put the wine that I might buy otherwise. So she likes that. So it's just a magnificent cruising machine to just cruise around. It's very comfortable, and but not to say that I don't like it when if I turn out onto a highway and I bury my foot in second gear and wind it out. That sounds magnificent, and it pulls beautifully, and I love that as well. It's a delight to drive from that perspective. No power steering, thumping great big steering wheel, lug the thing around the place. And those that say that Corvettes don't handle have driven a Corvette that's had a shonky right-hand drive conversion done, or it's got shocking suspension bushes. And if you get the suspension set up correctly in a Corvette, it goes where it's put. It handles beautifully. I love driving it. But the Ferrari it's a wild child. Even with the stability control stuff and all of that sort of thing on, it's raw, and mine's rawer than most, I suppose, as far as the sound of it is concerned. With the exhaust on it being pretty much straight piped, it is damn loud. And if you get going in that thing and really wind it out, it's absolutely magnificent. It just sounds gorgeous. Windows down in the tunnel. I reckon that they made those Hyson tunnels just for me. Windows down in the Hyson tunnel, slow down on the way into it in second gear and floor it. And if you haven't got the hackle standing up on the back of your neck by the time you're doing that, you're not a car person.
I genuinely think those 360s are probably almost the best sounding cars out there, just especially with the pipe and the manual. I mean, I know the times we've been for drives, and it's just the most glorious thing. You feel yourself just changing down the gears and then winding it back up through the gears again, just because it sounds so fantastic. Can't help yourself. I imagine that probably never gets old. So.
No, it doesn't at all. You're right. It's absolutely magnificent. And it's just the attention to detail with the way that the things are built as well. I mean, my mother, who's happy birthday for yesterday, Mum. It's her mum's birthday yesterday. Mum jumped in it, and her first comment was, "My word, the seats are very comfortable," and they are. They hug you beautifully. They're lovely to be able to drive and push a little bit. They hug you beautifully for that, but they're very, very comfortable to sit in, and just delightful. So the attention to detail on the design of the thing, I love it to bits. It's beautiful.
Yeah, fantastic. No, very good.
Awesome. Good. Thanks, Guy.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. This has been a great chat. I know that the spread of I've got a long-held sort of belief that I think most car people would probably be plane people if it was a little bit more accessible. So yeah, it's good to hear the sort of the insider insight into the two of those, and to combine them is a very obviously you've worked exceptionally hard to be in the position you are, but also very, very lucky to be able to sort of combine them both to that degree. It's fantastic to hear. So thank you.
I couldn't agree more, Andrew. I think that as far as how lucky I am, and I'm extremely aware of how lucky I am, just because of where I've got to with what I do, but also for the magnificent person who is my wife, who has allowed me to do the stupid stuff that I've got up to. I love her dearly, and I thank her from the bottom of my heart for being so understanding about the stupid stuff that I've been up to.
And of course, it's an interesting point because that the life of being the partner of a pilot. Obviously, there's a lot of time away from home, and I noticed that when you are home, you are home. Like there's a lot of time at home, which people who work long hours and commute might not have. But also there are those long stints, so it is good to acknowledge that, I guess. So yeah.
Yeah, well, very much in the long haul world, Andrew. The long haul world's different, that you do get those long periods of time at home. On the 737, you don't. And for me, I've always found that it takes me a while to wind down after I finish work, and it takes me a while to wind up before I go to work. So by the time I add those two in, if I've got a couple of days off, I haven't switched off during that time. I'm still thinking aviation stuff, and you need to be on a bit of an edge when you go to work. You need to be ready to be able to do it. And you can't just sort of switch off. Even after a long, long flight, and I might be really tired, I don't sleep well straight away because my mind's still going.
Yeah. All right.
Very good.
Well, I'm obviously Sportscar Safari podcast. Make sure you're following us at Sportscar Safari on the various Instagram, Facebook. Issue 3, hopefully going to print in the next week or two. We think we're pretty much signing that off, so that'll be out shortly. Guy, thanks for joining us. It's been great.
Thanks very much for having me, both of you, and thanks for everything over the years with what we've done. And I'm really looking forward to reading the new one.